Thank you for joining us for this virtual panel on online and hybrid internships and how we scale them. My name is Michael Horn, and I'm the co-founder of the Clayton Christensen Institute. I'm an author on the future of education and an advisor to Guild Education, which works with employers to help provide critical education and upskilling opportunities for their frontline workers. This panel is part of the 2022 STEM Summit, which is hosted, of course, jointly by the Massachusetts STEM Advisory Council, the Massachusetts Business Roundtable, and the University of Massachusetts Donahue Institute. This year, the summit is, of course, featuring both in-person and virtual events for educators and employers across the Commonwealth to foster STEM education opportunities for all students and facilitate internships with business partners. Additional panels, videos, and one-pagers on promising practices for starting an internship program, a mentorship program, curriculums, and more can be found in our virtual library of content. Today, I'm really excited to talk with you and this outstanding panel that we have really about virtual and hybrid work models as they've gained ascendance and the ascendance of how we need to therefore take advantage of a new approach to internships. I'm looking forward to the conversation today and looking forward to each of them introducing themselves. So without further ado, we'll dive right in. We've got three panelists here today who are going to shed a lot of insight. Dr. Nikki James from Northeastern University, President David Podell from Mass Bay Community College, and Janet Levesque, the Chief Information Security Officer from Athena Health. And I'll just go around to each of you. Why don't we start with you, Dr. James, giving a quick little introduction of yourself and how you come to this conversation around online and hybrid internships.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. I am Dr. Nikki James. I am a visiting assistant teaching professor at Northeastern University, primarily focused on social entrepreneurship and innovation, which is a little bit different to virtual internships. But as a social entrepreneur, I always saw the need for better quality education, particularly experiential education like internships, which was something that I was always passionate about. And so I transitioned into research and doing my doctorate in examining how we can use technology to scale quality experiential learning so it was accessible to more and more students. So that's how I got into this field. That was in 2014, way before the pandemic was even a thing. And so it's really exciting to be able to be here today and share some of the work we did in the lead up to the pandemic before we even knew, and seeing what happened and what we were able to do during the pandemic, and then what's been happening post-pandemic. So thanks for having me.
Terrific. Thanks, Nikki. And David, let's go to you next. Introduce yourself and how you come to this conversation.
Thanks, Michael. I'm David Podell. I'm the president of Mass Bay Community College, which is in Wellesley, Framingham, and Ashland. And of course, as you can imagine, as a community college, Mass Bay relies very heavily on internships for our students who really need opportunities. Many of our students are first-generation students. They need opportunities to be in the professions before they enter the professions and have that transitional experience. We have internships not only in STEM, but in early childhood education, hospitality, interior design, management, etc. Of course, we'll be talking today about the STEM internships, but internships in general are a key pivotal part as they are integrated into the curriculum.
Perfect. And last but certainly not least, Janet from Athena Health, give us how you come to this conversation and your background.
Sure, Janet Levesque. I'm privileged to serve as the Chief Information Security Officer for Athena Health, which develops and supports electronic health records management systems for ambulatory care practices. And really our goal is to create a thriving ecosystem that delivers accessible, high quality, and sustainable healthcare for everyone. I run a team of about 50 people and currently have a number of roles that are open, and have always leveraged interns as a pipeline to get students into my program. I also am privileged to serve on STEM Match, which is a group of companies and schools really bringing together an opportunity for STEM education to make it more visible and accessible for people who historically have not been in STEM communities, so underrepresented groups, people of color, people of lower income and other groups that are underrepresented. So, and part of that group and working closely with STEM Match to create opportunities in Massachusetts for prosperity and equity with targeted education. So I'm really excited for the conversation today.
Terrific. And you can all see why I'm really excited to have this conversation, because I think we just have the perfect group of folks to have us think about these important questions around online and hybrid internships and scaling them equitably throughout the Commonwealth. So I want to set the table for folks who are tuning in right now, sort of about the changing nature of internships. Obviously, through the pandemic, we saw a rush to online work more generally, but certainly internships as well. And it sort of brought forth a much greater attention on this topic of online hybrid internships. As Nikki, you noted, they're not new, but they certainly are gaining importance. I'd be curious for each of you to sort of lay out the big trends that you're seeing around online and hybrid internships, how this has shifted the nature of internships, and what seems to be sticking specifically as we move more into this endemic phase of the pandemic. David, if you could go first, that'd be great.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. Well, we've had internship programs for years and years and years, and then suddenly we hit the COVID pandemic. So the roadblock was enormous. Many of our internship programs just stopped in their tracks because the businesses themselves had to adjust to the new circumstances. But, over time, what we have found is that employers have reinvented the nature of work in their business, and as a result, internships. So we've had really incredible changes in the internship opportunities for our students that we're really excited about. I will say, just so everybody knows, that to do an internship when you're a college student at Mass Bay, but I'm sure it's true at other colleges, you need to have a GPA of 2.0 or higher, and you need a faculty sponsor, someone who will work with you. So the internship becomes an academic experience as well as a work experience. That's very important to us from the college perspective. Also, we're in this interesting moment where the demand for workers is so high that employers are motivated to create internships because they see opportunities for training and recruitment. So it's a really interesting moment. At Mass Bay, two of the paths I want to describe to you that I think are just so interesting. One involves STEM Match, which Janet was just talking about a moment ago, in our field of cybersecurity. Mass Bay has the only associate degree in cybersecurity, specifically in the Commonwealth. So the program is very important to us. It's longstanding and very strong. At any one moment, we have 100 students in our cybersecurity programs. But of course, internship is a key aspect, and cybersecurity lends itself to online and remote kinds of internships by the nature of the work. So working with STEM Match, we've been able to match students to paid internships, and I'll come back to the notion of paid internships in a moment, for these cybersecurity students. Chris Xanatos, I think, invented the idea of this and pushed it forward. I'm sure Janet will tell us more. But what we've had is a string of students who've been able to work at really major companies like TJX and John Hancock, Sigilant, often getting jobs right after. So the partnership of the college and the college faculty in particular with the employer, which STEM Match has facilitated, has been really critical in our comeback during this time. The other side of STEM where we've had a really interesting innovation in internships is in biotech, where we've worked with the Open Avenues Foundation to create business internships, biology internships in, we call them micro internships because they happen during an academic course. And in these instances, students have been able to work in areas such as gene editing, bioinformatics, building data sets for clinical trials. And these are invaluable experiences for students at the associate level who are hoping to get a job when they get their associate's degree and need that kind of remote experience while we're transitioning and beyond, because a lot of the work is data-based and can be done from home. Coming back to my earlier point about paid internships, remote or not remote, that's critical for community college students who, compared to students at four-year colleges, often have less income in the home. They can't afford an unpaid internship because it means giving up time on the job, which they desperately need to support themselves or their families. So paid internships are a key to the progress. And particularly when we talk about low-income families, students who are struggling, most Mass-based students have a job or two or three. So to benefit from the crucial internship experience, they need paid internships. And we're really, really grateful to the companies that have stepped up and provided them. And I'll just also mention the donors. We have quite a number of private donors who've given money for paid internships, understanding the importance of this for our students. So I end on that note because it's just so critical to the opportunities for community college students to move forward.
Just to echo what David has said about these STEM match and the program at Mass Bay, one of the things, both in a former role and in my current role, I really like about the program and the curriculum is that it's stackable. So it's essentially being able to get a number of certificates that then pile on to get to an associate's degree. And it means that once a student has completed that first certificate program, that they're trained and able to join a company in a entry-level type of a role, which is critical for those of us that are trying to hire in cybersecurity where there's zero unemployment. And it's really challenging to find people to fill those roles. So it becomes a really nice pipeline for us. And I think, given that we're focusing on sort of non-traditional students, the remote and hybrid notion has actually worked out a lot better because you're not expecting a student to have to commute to up 128 to find to go to a company, that they're able to do it from the comfort of their own home. And there's less of that time commitment required for commuting, which makes it beneficial for both the employer and the intern to be able to perform their work. I will say that it was challenging at the beginning of the pandemic to bring on interns because we were all struggling to figure out what remote work really meant for us as an organization. So there was a pause. But I think now that we've been at this for 2+ years, we've figured out ways to be creative to be able to bring on both full-time employees as well as interns.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's really interesting to hear the different perspectives. And I guess for me, when I'm looking at the macro trends, I've always, seen the need for virtual internships, always seen the need for additional models of experiential learning and internships and things like that. And I think the pandemic kind of forced our eyes to be opened a little bit more about, okay, we do, there's now an imminent need. And the way we talked about it in our work and in the research team I was working with was that all of a sudden overnight, every student became a non-traditional, what we would call a traditionally underserved student. They all became remote. They all got sent home. All of our employees got sent home and weren't able to go to the office. And you can't have an in-person internship if there's no one there. And one of the things that I guess we've seen just on those macro trends, initially, we saw internships very, very quickly decline. In March 2020, myself and my colleague that I was doing research with, Kemi Jonah, we basically were sitting and realized that we had a model that we were designing to try, in curriculum program where the students were doing a team project for an employer as part of their degree. We were calling it a virtual internship. We realized that all these in-person internships were disappearing and that we had a model that we'd been working on to try and serve traditionally underserved students that weren't able to get these opportunities, that it was able to now serve all students. So how I got involved in this in the Commonwealth was we just decided to scale out this program that we'd spent the last 3 years developing and just open it up for anybody that wanted to use it. And we went from kind of being the practitioners implementing a virtual internship model with a few of our College of Professional Studies faculty to almost becoming coaches and helping to train industry partners and faculty on how to actually implement these models, so that we could try and almost save some of those internships that were disappearing. And then in the midst of that, we were asked by the Massachusetts STEM Council to present some of that work to the STEM Council and show them what we were doing. And they asked us to collaborate with them and the Executive Office of Education to start what we now call MassWin, which is a community of employer partners and career and technical education teachers to try and create these opportunities at that high school level to get the students more opportunities to explore careers and engage with industry, utilizing this model of virtual internship where the students are doing a class for credit, but they're actually doing a real world project as part of that class. So they're being supported technically by their teachers, but they're getting feedback from industry and having to adapt. And they're not just getting a grade or trying to find the right answer on a test, but they're actually trying to solve or implement some of their skills in a real world situation. And then we did a similar thing with the Boston Summer Youth Employment Program. So we essentially had a model and then went and tried to use that model to serve in a lot of different communities, which has been super exciting.
I just wanted to come back to something Janet just said about the flexibility that the remote internships provide. For my students, that has been so critical. When the pandemic began, we provided laptops for any student who needed it because we had to do all of our instruction, our classroom instruction remotely. So we had a big loaner program. And for students in sort of high tech fields, we had to give higher level laptops so they could do their work. But what we found for those students was that many of them could really then take off, because it sounds so simple, but having a laptop or a high powered laptop allowed them to do classwork and then internship and make it flexible with their work schedule and their family schedule. And this was critical for students who, some of the obstacles are just purely logistical, getting a good quality laptop and getting good quality internet connections. And then they can take off and participate in an internship that they otherwise might never be able to do because of the transportation time and their other responsibilities. So if we're really committed to diversifying the workforce and to strengthening it with good, solid, well-prepared people, then this kind of opportunity with remote internships with proper supports is just enormously valuable.
It's super helpful, David. And I think that logistical end of the students speaks to the question that I want to transition to next and direct toward Janet first, which is the logistics on the employer side around this. And I'm very curious, you mentioned that there was a bit of a pause, a bit of a shifting because employers were trying to figure out what does remote work mean, period. I'm curious where you've landed now in terms of facilitating and onboarding these online and hybrid internships. What has had to change around the employer side of the practice? And then David and Nikki, after Janet's gone, I'd love to hear your reactions about what that means from the academic side of the house.
Sure. Interestingly enough, I joined Athena in January of 2021. So I onboarded myself during the pandemic and have literally been in my office 3 times in the time that I've worked for Athena. And so the way I was onboarded and the way my orientation occurred, we quickly transitioned what used to be 4 days up in Belfast, Maine to a virtual onboarding. And as we think about bringing on interns, they would go through a very similar type of virtual onboarding for our interns as well. So I haven't had an intern in the year that I've been here, but we're planning on leveraging some of the folks from STEM Match and Mass Bay this summer. And I think, as we think about our program, as David mentioned, the paid component and compensation is a key piece of it. But I also think internships have evolved so much from when I was in university, when I did an internship and I literally was putting together binders for 4 months. We've really made it much more appealing and meaningful work for our students. And one of the things I did in a prior role when I had interns was to rotate them through the various different domains in cybersecurity. So typically you would see an entry-level person join like a security incident response team and be doing triage. And what I've liked to have done in the past is to really rotate them through the different domains in the program, because there are so many components of cybersecurity. So everything from our threat intelligence teams to our attack surface reduction teams, vulnerability management teams, risk and compliance, application security. I mean, there's so many different domains, giving a student exposure to the different domains so they can then determine where they best fit long-term, and providing them good access to supervisors and mentors, and giving them detailed direction and making sure they understand the scope of the projects that they're working on. And then providing meaningful feedback at the end, giving them good evaluations, giving them constructive feedback. I mean, I had an intern a few years ago who had was lacking some of the basics, like show up to a meeting with a pad and a pen, right? And or a laptop to take notes. And, some of the basics that you have to train. I think programs are doing a much better job of preparing students than they did in the past. And so providing some of those tips ahead of time are some of the things that I've seen work well.
What you're saying, Janet, warms my heart, because the greatest fear in internships is that the student will be doing something meaningless, as opposed to doing something that leads to really strong professional growth. And what you've described makes me just think of the importance of being deliberate and planful in the internship experience, giving the student an opportunity for to cycle through a number of different departments so that they can experience and start to choose which is the area they want to pursue in their stackable credentials. That's so critical. And I have to say, the mentoring, we all remember our first jobs where we were oblivious to so much, and we didn't know what to wear, and we didn't know how to behave, and we didn't know what to. We're trying to give students some stepping stones so they're not on their own. And the internship experience is so key to that professional growth, connecting what they've learned in the college to the real world, but also growing as a professional. And we rely very heavily on the employers to work with us to build a meaningful, worthwhile internship that really helps the student take off. And we've been so grateful to our business partners who have made the effort, given the thought, and as a team planned a really good quality internship for students, because that will make or break the internship experience. And particularly in a remote setting where there's greater opportunity to kind of disappear and not be in the daily contact. So it takes that degree of extra care and planfulness to make sure that the quality is there for the student. And we really appreciate that work that Janet and people like Janet are doing to make sure those internships are of really good quality.
Yeah, I've seen largely the same thing, I guess, coming at it from a researcher perspective now, as opposed to an educator, as we've tried to kind of understand this ecosystem of an internship, because it is really the student or students, a teacher, or an academic institution and an employer. And often all of the knowledge to be able to create that valuable internship opportunity for a student is in that ecosystem, but it's often sitting in multiple places. So the industry person knows what's happening in the real world, knows what an entry-level employee is going to have to be able to do, but then the teacher knows where the students are at, what they're going to be capable of, and what they would be able to do in the period of time that is set aside for the internship opportunity. So what we've kind of started trying to do is kind of create project templates or internship templates, if you will, of opportunities that we've seen work really well that can be used by lots of different teachers and lots of different industry partners. So I'm sure that some of the internships, Janet, that you have done would be something that many other organizations might be able to use for their students, but they might not, I guess, realize that that would be something that a student could do or may not have thought of that before. So one of the things that we got to in the research and what has, I guess, been one of the critical success factors is having these internship templates that we could go to industry partners and go to teachers going, hey, is this something that you would be able to do? And it has enabled us to get to that next level of scale. And then implementing the technology that kind of is helping to provide that structured process that the students go through. And we've kind of embedded videos of all those things, Janet, that you were talking about, that show up to work with a paper and a pen and all that. And I know for myself, I'm a first generation high school graduate, and I chose my undergrad degree based on looking at what my mum did, looking at what my dad did, and said I didn't want to do that, but sports sounded fun. So I studied sports science. And now I'm a teacher in a university, so very different. And I think if students in the early years of their college or high school are able to get more opportunities to see these industries, I definitely would have gone a different direction myself if I'd had more of those opportunities. So I'm a very strong advocate for that as well, and the importance of exploration at that young age.
The one thing I didn't mention was that there is a somewhat self-serving reason for interns, is that it's to create a pipeline of candidates for entry-level jobs. And so it's almost a little bit of a try before you buy type of scenario where you can have someone test out. I know I had an intern again in a prior company that I worked for, and we converted him to a full-time employee after a successful internship. And it was a great match for both him. He was one of the first people in his family to go to college. And we were able to fill a role that were having a hard time finding on a help desk. And so it was a win-win scenario. So we often look for students that are, later in their college experience. So then we make that investment with them for a summer or two, and then they can convert to a full-time employee.
That's where greed is good, I think, where the self-serving nature, it benefits everyone
Exactly.
around, right? So, Nikki, I want to turn to you and just make a quick note that some might argue that surviving on an athletic field and then surviving with students in a university have some similarities, but I won't ask you to opine on that. I guess I'm more curious if you could go deeper. You mentioned Mass Win, but also the Boston Summer Youth Employment Program and some of these innovations that you've been leading. If you could go a little bit deeper on the nature of them, how they work, and what you've learned from it. And then David and Janet pull out how that, your thoughts on what Nikki says, but also obviously how that relates to some of the initiatives that you've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, I started working on this research in 2014 in Sydney, Australia at the time, if everybody has been trying to pick out my accent. And then I met a fellow conspirer, if you will, in Kemi Jonah, one of my collaborators here at Northeastern, and he convinced me to come on over to Northeastern to continue this work. And so essentially what we were trying to work out is if we could embed technology into this internship experience to take some of that operational overhead away and to help kind of, I guess, process, manage, and systemize these very complex feedback loops that happen in an internship. Maybe we could provide more opportunities or provide like almost an ecosystem connector, if you will, to help it scale. And then the other thing we also realize is a lot of teachers, so hi to all the teachers out there, when you've got students running all over the Commonwealth, either sitting in their bedroom doing a remote internship or in person, you lose sight of them. And I know as a teacher myself, I often am watching my students. Are they getting it? Are they bored? Are they excited? Are they understanding what I'm trying to put down? And when they're not physically in front of you, you lose all those effective cues that you use to work out when you need to jump in, when you need to coach, when you need to support. So what we tried to do is almost create a dashboard for them. We like to call it almost like an air traffic control system. So you've got students flying left and right and industry partners trying to support all the different students. But we have this dashboard that enables you to see, is there a student that has missed a deadline? Is there an employer that hasn't provided feedback yet? Are the students confident in the work that they're doing? Are they getting negative feedback and might need more support? So we're essentially trying to use the technology not to be the communication conduit, but to enable that more authentic communication with a much more streamlined and hopefully low time investment, so that it actually means that an employer can maybe support 5 interns instead of 1 with the same amount of time. And the educator can then maybe have a whole class doing an internship instead of just 3 students, because that's the time they have available. So we've seen that work really well with MassWin. So what we've been doing with MassWin is actually training the teachers on how to support virtual internships, because the role is very different to support and facilitate a group of 100 students doing an internship virtually than it is being in the classroom working with those students. And so providing them time to learn the model and learn the different roles and all the things that need to happen and how to engage with the industry partners and how to design a project and all of that, and then supporting them as they implement a virtual internship in their school. And then they're able to also collaborate with others that are doing similar things and sharing those projects that work really well, sharing the ones that don't work so well, which always happens. Oh, well, that didn't work. And then hopefully together we can increase the volume of opportunities for young people. And that's been similar with the City of Boston Summer Youth Employment Program. That's, again, the same model, except for when we implemented it, they had an existing program, but all the employees were at home in 2020. So the students couldn't come in, the employees couldn't come in. And so we kind of almost implemented the virtual option into an existing partnership and really supported them to continue on during the pandemic. And then a lot of employers haven't fully gone back to the office. So now we're seeing hybrid models and having the students do a remote project part of the time, but then go into the office when their supervisor is there. And so that's been really great. And then just to add on, we've also injected our students at Northeastern into the mix as well to kind of hopefully get to that next level of scale where they're now mentoring teams of students as interns in the company, which means that the company can actually have more summer employees, because our Northeastern students who are very familiar with the co-op model can actually be the mentors and supervisors for the younger, less experienced students. So that's been a real win as well.
You know, I'm so impressed by what you're describing, Nikki, because it empowers the faculty. You know, at community college in Massachusetts, our faculty have a heavy teaching load, the heaviest I've ever heard, but it is juxtaposed with their desire to do the most for their students. So this approach, the air traffic control model, really could empower the faculty, because the best case scenario is the student has a great experience at a virtual internship and gets a job. The worst case scenario is it all goes wrong and the employer doesn't want any interns anymore. And then, of course, along the range. But if we can ensure, keep working on an iterative approach, the quality, and maintain the communication and maintain the integrity of the internship experience, then we're more likely to get the win at the top of that spectrum.
So I want to, as we sort of start to wrap up here, the last question that I have for all of you is, you all have named implicitly a number of advantages, I think, to the online or virtual internships. I'm not going to ask you to make a choice if you would choose traditional or online if you had to, make a choice. But I guess I'm curious to have you each maybe spell out more explicitly the advantages to online and hybrid internships over traditional ones for students, for employers, for faculty and staff at academic institutions. But then also, if you want to just lay out some of the trade-offs that are made when you go online as opposed to in person, I think that would be helpful for people just to be thinking about both sides of the ledger, so to speak. David, why don't you jump in, and then Nikki and Janet.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. I think we've touched upon many of the advantages, the opportunity to work from anywhere, less time in transportation. There might be opportunities for more variety of work, and it might be more similar to the work they will do, the interns, as the world has changed permanently. I think the biggest concern I have is about relationships, because part of the internship experience is developing relationships with the coworkers, the supervisors at the work site. And those can be formal and informal. And that's part of the benefit of any internship. So I always fear that as with a remote classroom, the personal relationships are challenged because you don't have those moments before the meeting, after the meeting, in the hallway, that are we've now learned in the last couple of years are so valuable to our professional growth, but also to our human growth, our personal growth. And it's the thing that I worry about the most, which means we have to be more inventive in finding ways to substitute other experiences for that. I don't think we're there yet, but I think that's a challenge ahead of us.
Yeah, I would completely concur with your comments, David. The flexibility and the work from anywhere, I think, has been a huge boon for remote work. But as someone who onboarded during a pandemic, those personal relationships are just much harder to develop over Zoom. And so, being, now that things are opening back up, being able to meet for a coffee or meet for an in-person meeting, making it more of a hybrid type of a situation where you can get to know someone as to your point, as a human, not just as an employee or an intern, I think is going to be critical as we move into this next phase of the pandemic. And for students, I'm a parent of 2 high school students, and I know for them, going back to being in person really just opened up both of their social life. And I mean, so much that was put on hold during the pandemic. And so it really makes a big difference to be able to be with people. And so I think we'll have to continue to figure out the trade-offs for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that relationships is a key thing that is very different in the virtual environment. I have a slightly different kind of, I guess, experience. I've met some great people all over the country during the pandemic through doing virtual wines and things like that. So I think obviously the students aren't going to be doing that, but I think there are ways to do that. And that might be the challenge of the trying to work out ways to do this in a unique and new way, as David, you mentioned. And I think in terms of the strengths and the trade-offs, just a little small plug to one of my collaborators, Dr. Alicia Sasa-Modestino. She's a labor economist here at Northeastern, and she actually used data from the City of Boston Summer Youth Employment Program to analyze some of the differences in the trade-offs and the things that the students or the youth employees preferred in their virtual internship compared to their in-person internships. And so there's some interesting findings in that report, and I'm happy to kind of share that as a hyperlink in my bio. So people should be able to find that somewhere. But yeah, one of the things that we've found really interesting is that students can do more. more different opportunities and try different careers, because they can, as Janet, as you said, they can jump around and do small projects in multiple different departments. Even they might not have landed specifically on cybersecurity yet, for example, and they could do cybersecurity or robotics, or they can try different companies. And so I think that this virtual kind of opportunity and utilizing technology to do that enables that more career exploration more broadly. And I think also the skill development is a big thing. Part of my research, along with creating that air traffic control system I mentioned, was trying to work out if we can utilize the data in the technology to have a better understanding of professional skills and how students are performing on those skills, and actually giving them reflective activities and personal development plans and things like that that they can embed and integrate into the internship experience, so that they're actually learning how to extract more knowledge and more skills and more learning from the experience in a structured way. So I think there's a great opportunity for that as well with the hybrid that you don't necessarily get in the in-person setting.
It makes a ton of sense. I feel like as I'm stepping away from this, I've learned a lot from this conversation. It strikes me a couple things. One, the concept of micro internships, which was gaining ascendancy before the pandemic, of course, but I think has really been fueled by this. You've all spoken to the advantages of the project-based work and being able to jump around and have that growth as an individual. I'll highlight a few other things for folks who are tuning in that I've taken from this. One, the importance of accounting for academic credit and being very deliberate about how the internship ties into the academic work. So there's really a synergy for the student, for the faculty member, about what one is doing in the work at an internship and what they're doing at school. It builds motivation on both sides. It also, something you all spoke to, it implies that you're going to be doing something meaningful and meaty to really create an opportunity for real professional growth for the individual, but also for that individual, for that student, an awareness of what do they want to do in life. And like Nikki, I think we're often very articulate about what we don't want to do, but we have limited perspectives on what we could do, what are out there, and so forth. And so the opportunity to have those jumps, to experience different possibilities and start to grow awareness of the career path that we want to carve out, it seems to me a tremendous opportunity in this, but then also being really deliberate about making sure we have those opportunities for mentorship and relationships, because we know that the building of social capital is so critical to being able to not only see the possibilities and figure out what you want to do, but then actually go seize them and open those doors, and doing something like that intentionally, I think is incredibly important. I'll just mention three other things that jumped out at me. One, the advantage of having templates ahead of time to structure these in really strong ways, and make sure you don't miss something that'll be important for the experience on either side of the ledger, for the employers, faculty members, or the students, making it a seamless experience. The importance of it being paid, heard that over and over again. I think it's critical to make sure that these are equitable also. And then the real advantage here of the flexibility and allowing people to make the work, their school life, their other responsibilities, their family caregiving responsibilities, whatever it might be, more seamless and more advantageous, so you're not unintentionally excluding someone. And then I'll just end on the last piece, which is I think we heard a plug for figuring out the hybrid element of these online internships, because that is a neat way to make these relationships really sing in ways that maybe you couldn't script beforehand. So hopefully I've done all right in summarizing the wonderful things you all said, but I just want to say, for those who've tuned in, there's going to be more information on our panelists, the programs that they've discussed. Nikki referenced some research. We'll make sure that all of that is in the summit's virtual library of content. So check that out so you can go deeper in some of these areas. And I'll just conclude by saying thank you to Janet, Nikki, David. Really appreciate this conversation, and thanks to all of you for tuning in.